They thought I wouldn't show up. That's the thing I remember most clearly. Walking into that conference room at Hargrove and Mills, the estate attorney's office on the 14th floor downtown, and seeing my mother's face go completely still when she spotted me in the doorway. Not surprised. Just calculating. Like she was already running the numbers on how to handle this. I sat down across from her and my father and didn't say a word. My grandmother's attorney, a quiet man named Mr. Hargrove, who wore the same brown cardigan every time I'd ever met him, set a folder on the table between us. My parents were already leaning forward before he even opened it. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without the beginning, and the beginning is ugly. I grew up in Mill Haven, Ohio, in a house that always smelled like burnt coffee and my mother's disappointment. I was the second child. My brother, 4 years older than me, was the one who could do no wrong. From the time I was old enough to understand what was happening, I understood the hierarchy. My brother got the car on weekends. I got the bus pass. My brother got the college fund conversation at the dinner table. I got told to figure it out. When I got into the honors program in 7th grade, my mother said, "Don't get too big for your britches." When my brother scraped through community college with a 2.1 GPA, my father threw him a graduation party and invited 40 people. I am not exaggerating. I have never exaggerated this. If anything, I've told it softer than it actually was. The one person in my family who saw me, really saw me, was my grandmother, my father's mother. She lived 40 minutes away in a small house in Cedarville with a vegetable garden that took up half her yard and a kitchen that always had something on the stove. I would take the bus to see her on Saturdays when I was in high school. My parents never asked where I was going. My grandmother would feed me and ask about my classes and actually listen to the answers. She came to my high school graduation when my parents forgot to put it in their calendar. I want to be precise about that. They forgot to put it in their calendar. My grandmother drove 40 minutes in a June heat wave and sat in the 3rd row and cried when they called my name. She was 71 years old and she pressed a $20 bill into my hand afterward and said, "You are going to be something, Addie. I've always known it. Addie. I've always known it. Addie." Nobody else called me that. My full name is Adelaide, which my parents apparently chose and then immediately found inconvenient, so they shortened it to Addie when I was small and then stopped using that too when I was a teenager. By the time I was 16, I was mostly just her in my own house. My grandmother called me Addie until the day she died. I got through college on scholarships, a Pell Grant, and 2 part-time jobs. One at a campus coffee shop, one doing data entry for a property management company on weekday evenings. I didn't go home much. There wasn't much to go home to. My grandmother came to visit me once junior year, took the Greyhound bus because she didn't like driving on the highway anymore, and I walked her around campus and we got ice cream and she held my arm the whole time and told me she was proud of me. "Your grandfather would have loved to see this," she said. My grandfather died before I was born. He built a manufacturing company in the 70s, sold it in the 90s, and left my grandmother what I always assumed was a modest amount of money. She lived simply. She drove a 12-year-old Buick. She shopped sales. I never thought about what she was actually worth. That wasn't why I loved her. After I graduated, I moved to Columbus for work, accounting, which I know sounds unglamorous, but I was good with numbers and I liked the logic of it, the way everything had to balance. I built a life there. Small apartment, reliable car, a savings account I was proud of. I called my grandmother every Sunday. My parents and I spoke maybe 4 times a year, and each call felt like a business transaction neither party was particularly invested in completing. Then, 2 winters ago, my grandmother had a stroke. She survived it, but she wasn't the same afterward. She moved slower. She got confused sometimes. Her doctor started talking about assisted living, which she resisted until the very end with a stubbornness I recognized because I got mine from her. I drove to Cedarville every other weekend those last 8 months. I helped her sort through paperwork, paid some of her bills online when the interface confused her, drove her to appointments. My parents came twice. Both times they stayed for about 2 hours, talked mostly about themselves, and left. She died on a Tuesday in early November. It was 4:17 in the morning and I was asleep in the guest bedroom of her house because I'd driven up the day before when the hospice nurse called to say it was getting close. I was holding her hand when she went. It was very quiet. My mother called me the next morning and the first thing she said, after about 30 seconds of something approximating condolences, was, "Do you know who the attorney is for the estate?" I told her I did. "We should all be there together," she said, "as a family." I said I'd send them the details, so there we were, 14th floor. Mr. Hargrove's conference room with the view of the parking structure. My parents on one side of the table, me on the other. My brother on the phone from Seattle where he'd moved 2 years ago and apparently couldn't be bothered to fly back for this. His voice came through the speaker in the center of the table, tinny and slightly impatient sounding. My mother had dressed up. She was wearing the blazer she wore to important things. Mr. Hargrove laid out the basics first. My grandmother's estate was being handled as she had specified. He said that in a very measured, deliberate way, as she had specified, and I noticed my mother's hands tighten slightly on the edge of the table. Then he opened the folder. My grandmother's house in Cedarville, fully paid off, valued at around $40,000. A brokerage account I had no idea existed. 2 rental properties in the Dayton area she had acquired in the 80s and quietly held onto for 40 years. A life insurance policy. When Mr. Hargrove finished reading the asset summary, there was a silence in the room that had a particular texture to it, the kind that comes when people are trying very hard not to react. The total value of my grandmother's estate was approximately $4.2 million. My mother let out a breath that wasn't quite a gasp. "That's," my father started. "There's more, Mr. Mond," Hargrove said in a way that was completely calm and matter-of-fact, and I understood right then that he had done this many times before and he was not going to rush it. He turned to the actual will. My grandmother had left my brother $50,000, a specific, deliberate amount. She noted in the document, and Mr. Hargrove read this part word for word because she had apparently asked him to, that she loved her grandson and wished him well, and that this gift was given freely and without condition. She had left my parents nothing. Also specifically deliberate. Also noted in the document, in her own language, which Mr. Hargrove read clearly, "I love my son. I also know my son. What I leave behind is mine to give as I see fit, and I choose to give it where it was earned." She left everything else, the house, the accounts, the rental properties, the insurance, to me. All of it. My mother stood up from her chair. Not dramatically, not knocking anything over. She just stood up, like she needed to be vertical to process this. "This is not right," she said. "This is not," she was not in her right mind at the end. You saw her. She was confused. "Mrs. Callahan, Mr. Gohl," Hargrove said, "your mother-in-law updated this will 14 months ago, which would have been approximately 6 months before her stroke. She was examined by her physician and found to be fully competent at the time of signing. She also left a letter." He looked at me. "The letter is addressed to Adelaide," he said. My mother sat back down. I didn't read the letter until I was in my car in the parking garage afterward. I sat there with the engine off and the concrete ceiling 8 feet above my head, and I opened the envelope my grandmother had sealed herself. In her handwriting, my name on the front with the little curls she always put on the capital A. "Addie, I expect this will cause some fuss. Let it. You know how I feel about fuss. I have watched you your whole life. I watched you do things the hard way because no one made it easy for you, and I watched you do them anyway. I watched your parents look right past you more times than I can count, and I watched you hold your head up every single time. I want you to have this because you are the only one who ever came. Not for the money. You didn't know about the money. You came because you wanted to. You sat with me in the garden. You drove me to my appointments. You were there on a Tuesday morning at 4 a.m. when I needed someone to be there. That is worth everything I have. The house needs the gutters cleaned. I kept meaning to do it. All my love, Grandma. I sat in that parking garage for a long time. My parents contested the will. I want to be straightforward about that, because I think people sometimes assume these things resolve themselves quietly and they don't, not always. My father hired an attorney within the week. The argument was what my mother had said in that conference room, that my grandmother had not been of sound mind, that she had been influenced, that I had somehow maneuvered myself into a position of control over an elderly woman's decisions. That last part, that one stayed with me for a while in the way that accusations do when they're about something you know to be true from the inside. I hired my own attorney, a woman named Ms. Enstu Farrow, who had an office near my apartment in Columbus and who listened to the full situation without interrupting and then said, "Do you have documentation of your visits? Texts, calendars, receipts, anything?" I had all of it. 2 years of Sunday phone calls on my cell records. Calendar entries for every Cedarville trip. Gas receipts. A folder of her appointment summaries that her doctor's office had emailed me because I was listed as her emergency contact, which my parents had apparently never inquired about. Photos on my phone from our visits, time-stamped, going back years. The hospice nurse who had called me that last Monday evening was willing to provide a statement. My grandmother's physician confirmed in writing that she had been fully competent 14 months before her death when the will was signed. Her attorney confirmed the same. The document had been executed correctly. There was nothing to contest. The process took 4 months. It cost me money I hadn't planned to spend and sleep I needed. There were weeks where I would wake up at 2 a.m. and lie there running through worst-case scenarios until my alarm went off. My parents did not speak to me during this period except through their attorney. My brother sent me one text message that said this is messed up without specifying what exactly he found messed up. The case was dismissed. I want to tell you what happened after, because I think that part matters too. I didn't call my parents when the case was dismissed. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said in the language of attorneys' letters. I drove to Cedarville on a Saturday in early spring, let myself into my grandmother's house with the key she'd given me years ago, and I walked through every room. It smelled like her. Like the cedar sachets she kept in her closets and the particular dish soap she always bought and something else underneath that I don't have a word for. I stood in her kitchen for a long time. The gutters needed cleaning. She'd been right about that. I hired someone to do the gutters. I had the carpets professionally cleaned. I fixed the bathroom faucet that had been dripping since the previous spring. I walked through her garden in March when there was still frost on the ground and made a note of what she had planted and thought about what I'd add in the summer. I want to be clear about this, I was not suddenly transformed. I did not feel victorious in any way that felt good. My grandmother was dead and she had been the best person in my family and she was not coming back, and no amount of money changes the arithmetic of that. I cried more times in those first few months than I had in the years before combined. Grief does not wait for the legal proceedings to conclude before it arrives. What I did feel, slowly and then more certainly, was something I hadn't felt before. It was stability. It was the particular quiet of not having to calculate every decision around the margin of error in my checking account. It was knowing that I had ground under my feet. I kept my job for another year. I liked it. I was good at it. When I eventually moved on, it was on my own terms and on my own timeline, which is a thing I had never been able to say before about any decision of any significance. I still drive to Cedarville most months. The house is mine now, and I'm slowly making it into something, not erasing her but adding to it the way you layer things over time. Her African violet is still on the kitchen windowsill. I have not moved it. My parents and I have not spoken since the case was dismissed. I think about whether that will change someday. I don't have an answer. What I know is that I am not angry in the way I used to be. That sharp, constant, low-grade angry that I carried for so long, I stopped noticing it as a separate thing from myself. It's quieter now. Not gone, but quieter. My grandmother knew what she was doing. She knew it would cause fuss. She did it anyway. I think about that a lot, the deliberateness of it. She didn't leave me a note that said I'm sorry for how they treated you, or I know things were hard. She didn't offer explanations on their behalf or soften anything. She just put my name on the documents and sealed the letter and trusted me to understand it. I understood it. There's a photo of us from the summer I was 15 in one of those disposable camera pictures that my grandmother had gotten developed and put in a small frame on her refrigerator. We're in the garden. I'm sunburned. She's wearing a hat that's too big for her. We're both laughing at something that's outside the frame. I moved the photo from her refrigerator to mine. Some things you keep exactly where they are. Some things you keep exactly where they are. Some things you carry with you. I think she knew the difference. She always did. I keep coming back to the timing of it. 14 months before her stroke, my grandmother sat down with Mr. Hargrove and signed her name to a decision she'd clearly been thinking about for a long time. She didn't tell me. She didn't warn anyone. She just did it quietly, the way she did most things that mattered. And then she went back home and planted her garden and called me on Sundays like nothing had changed. That's the part that gets me. Not the money. The clarity. I think about the years I spent in that house in Millhaven feeling like I was invisible, and then I think about my grandmother watching all of it from 40 minutes away, seeing exactly what was happening and deciding, without drama, without confrontation, that she was going to do something about it in the only way she actually could. She couldn't change my parents. She knew that. Some people don't change, and spending your energy trying to force it just burns you down to nothing. What she could do was make sure that the one person who kept showing up was taken care of. So that's what she did. There's a cause and effect logic to this story that I didn't fully understand until I was sitting in that parking garage reading her letter. My parents treated kindness like a transaction, something you extended when there is a return on it and withheld when there wasn't. My grandmother treated it as a practice, something you did because of who you were, not because of what you expected back. And those two approaches produced two completely different lives, and two completely different outcomes in that conference room on the 14th floor. I didn't show up to Cedarville every other weekend because I thought I'd be rewarded for it. I showed up because she was the only person in my family who ever made me feel like I belonged somewhere. That's it. That's the whole reason. And she knew it. She said as much in the letter. You came because you wanted to. She could tell the difference between someone who was present and someone who was performing presence, and she valued the real thing accordingly. What I've learned from all of this, what I'm still learning, is that character is not invisible even when you think no one is watching. The way you treat people when there's nothing in it for you is exactly the kind of thing that gets noticed, slowly, over years, by the people who are paying attention. My grandmother was always paying attention. She was sharper than anyone gave her credit for. Right up until the end, and she made her decision with a clear head and a steady hand because she had spent decades observing who each person actually was underneath the version they presented. I think that's what I want to carry forward from her. Not just the house or the financial stability, though I won't pretend those things don't matter because they do enormously, but the way she moved through the world, with her eyes open, with her values intact, without bitterness, even when bitterness would have been completely justified. She didn't leave my parents nothing as punishment. She left me everything as recognition. There's a difference, and it matters. The gutters are clean now. I had them done in October before the leaves came down. I think she would have appreciated that.